Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us for our second ethics series of the year at Massey College entitled The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence, Threat or Opportunity. My name is Arvind Krishandhal, and I'm a junior fellow here at the college and a second-year PhD student studying public policy and Canadian politics at the University of Toronto. Before I introduce our very distinguished panelists today, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territory in which we are gathered on today. On behalf of Massey College, I acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples, and is still the home to many Indigenous people, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to engage in such a highly topical and quite novel discussion investigating the topic of immigration and AI today. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. From my left, far left, going over to my right, Sara Maqsood is a junior fellow at Massey College and a recent JD graduate of the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. She's delivered community legal education for newcomers and refugee families through downtown legal services and assisted faculty research on charter rights and equity impacts in public policy. Her research experience includes work on the kafala guardianship system and barriers to adoption affecting Muslim families in Canada, examining discrimination concerns under the charter. At Massey, she serves as co-chair of the Massey Law Society. Welcome. Next to Sara, we have Gurpreet Malhotra. He has been a professional in human services for over 36 years and is currently the Chief Executive Officer at Indus Community Services, which is a leading provider of culturally responsive community and health services. The agency has 7 locations in Mississauga and Brampton, just west of Toronto, and has a dedicated staff complement of over 150. Gurpreet has more than a decade of experience as a professor and program coordinator of the Innovative Community Development Diploma Program at the Sheridan Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning, where he also served as a human rights advisor. He holds 2 degrees in public policy administration and appears frequently in national and local news as a community advocate on behalf of the many communities he serves. Welcome, Gurpreet. Next to Gurpreet, we have Kevin Newman. Kevin Newman has a long and distinguished, respected career as a national and international journalist who has reported on covering on anchoring news in the midst of election nights, wars, revolutions for over 30 years. He was the founding anchor and executive editor of Global National. Kevin won 2 Gemini Awards for Best News Anchor, Emmy Awards for his breaking news coverage, and a Peabody Award for ABC's Millennium Night coverage. Before his retirement in 2019, he was the host of CTV's W5, Question Period, and Kevin Newman Live. Currently, he is the co-founder and advisor to the CEO of GetFact, contributing to building an innovative AI-powered fact-checking platform designed to combat misinformation. Welcome, Kevin. Now I'd like to turn the mic over to Don Gibson, co-chair of the Massey Ethics Program. Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, again, I want to also thank the 3 of you for joining us. It's really good to have you. Thank you. I mean, there's no question that AI has generated an enormous amount of attention. If you spent any time browsing through any newspapers today, there were countless articles across the platforms of the whole issue about AI and the AI bubble and its impact on the stock market, on the economy. That's just everywhere. But there's also, of course, been a tremendous amount of attention on those who offer enthusiastic support for AI and what it might do, and others who are raising growing concerns about its threat. Today we're going to spend probably the first half of our panel looking in general at the impact of AI. And then the second part will shift our focus and we'll look at the practical implications of AI's use within Canada's immigration process. And as we're thinking about this from an ethical perspective, I want to share a quote, a statement recently by Pope Leo. Leo has been speaking quite consistently about the issue of human dignity, and I think this fits well within that understanding. He writes that he calls on all builders of AI to cultivate moral discernment as a fundamental part of their work, to develop systems that reflect justice, solidarity, and genuine reverence for life. And I thought that was a pretty good framework for our conversation. And so I'm going to turn it over to you folks right away. And Kevin, I'll ask you to share with us first, if you wouldn't mind.
I think what the Pope is saying there is certainly something that is providing a moral grounding for what is a race at lightning speed. And I mean, I'm old enough to remember, I basically am the internet generation. I mean, believe it or not, I was the first face of a newscast broadcast over the internet when I was at ABC in the United States, and it would scan, every 16 seconds. So it was more like a series of stills, and it was a moving image. But what we're experiencing with AI is something of such magnitude and such speed that the horses left the barn like a very long time ago. So to have the Pope talk about the sanctity of life in the AI world, to me, is a reminder to keep humans in the loop and to make sure that more than simply proving that we can do it, to raise the questions of whether we should do it. I think the issues of moral discernment are particularly interesting to me. Myself and my co-founder, Wilf Dinnick, who is such a loyal co-founder that he's actually in the audience today, when we went and thought about creating a solution to the problem of misinformation by harnessing AI, which can basically do 300 fact checks in 90 seconds that would take an entire newsroom that doesn't exist anymore to do, we thought a lot about what do we want the AI to do. Do we want it to give you a Rotten Tomatoes thumb up and thumb down? To say this is an okay story, this is a bad story, go ahead and share it. And I think what the Pope is saying about moral discernment is that that's just not enough. That you can't just use AI for the march to be lazy, to be lazier. That the key element in moral discernment to me was show the work, force AI to explain how it reached that conclusion, protect critical thinking by displaying machine critical thinking, because I think what we've seen so far from AI, at least from the LLMs, has been a degree of certainty that is pleasing to humans, but is not necessarily accurate. And so, thank you. And so what we built into our AI agent, whom we called Laura for Laura Secor, the heroine of the War of 1812, we built that moral discernment into it, that we don't want our AI to be as pleasing to the humans by being certain. We want it to swim in the ambiguity of uncertainty, which is where most journalism and most academic pursuits, I think, live. And to verify information based on a sliding scale of how many sources reported. So I think what the Pope has done is he has seen the speed with which things are happening, and it's a reminder of, as we move from, oh my gosh, isn't this an incredible thing that we can do now, into a more nuanced and broader array of types of AI. He's provided sort of the guidance of, well, this is what will serve humanity best in the long run. My problem is none of the current incentives for the explosion of AI reward that kind of behavior. Most of the current incentives reward getting there first, being destructive, and making money.
I think, Kevin, you said it all, honestly. That was, I'm sitting there thinking, no, I can't repeat that. But what, yeah, yes. But the idea is, that's right, there's no incentive to slow down and to build something that would be, that would offer that ambiguity, that would offer the different shades of gray, that would offer a non-exact response. Everything is the other direction, and that means that we have already built systems that are based on flawed ways of looking at things, or that have an implicit bias, perhaps connected to race, or perhaps connected to gender, or other forms of prejudice that have already been built in. And I think actually among all of those, as horrible as those forms of prejudice are, the pressure towards profit, speed, and getting there first at all costs is what I think is going to cause the most difficulty for us, because that means that we will be using a tool that, and many of you, well, some of you may remember Netscape versus Microsoft and other types of pieces where decent tools would be wiped out by more profitable, cutthroat business practices. And that meant that tools that would perhaps give you a broader way of looking at something, or a more human approach to things are already being left behind. And we got to find a way to be able to bring that back into the picture, as the Pope would have us do. So I think it's laudable, but I think it's already a bit uphill.
I don't know if this is on, by the way. It is? Okay. Okay, great. I think my peers have echoed some of my sentiments perfectly. I think one of the things that we're seeing with AI is that it is simply a pattern recognition system, but it is a pattern recognition system that is so amplified that it can just do this so much faster than any human person can do it. But the problem with that is you are the ones that are feeding it the system that it relies on. So if our system already has inherent bias within it, it will then go on to only amplify that bias further. So I think when we are thinking about the ethics of AI, we look at, we're talking about parameters to set, et cetera. But for me, I think when I think about ethics and what really needs to go into AI when we're building systems is to ensure that we're preserving human dignity. And we do that by ensuring that there's transparency, ensuring, like, we know, you were talking earlier about how you create the design system of AI. So ensuring that there's transparency in how the system was created, fairness, because we are very concerned with the outcomes. The system can be well-meaning. It can be designed by well-meaning people, but what is the effect of that system? And then also, I would say meaningful human oversight. And I know when we get into the immigration section, we're going to talk about human oversight, but I think that the things that we evaluate at that point is it symbolic or is it meaningful? And so I would advocate that it has to be meaningful human oversight to ensure that we're having ethics. And I really like what Kevin was mentioning earlier about having it embedded within the system, whereas I think right now we're very reactionary and we're creating the systems as is, and after the fact, we're evaluating, does this meet the ethics standards or not? And I think we need parameters, whether that's legislative laws or other aspects, we need parameters to ensure that when we're designing the system, we have these ethics built within.
Well, this is a little bit simplistic, but just as an observation and kind of a question for conversation. I realized when I was thinking about AI for a good long time, I was focusing on AI from my perspective, how much information are they getting about me? What are they doing with it? It was all about me. When I'm trying to sort a product problem or a service problem, can I ever talk to a real person? So it was that was where I was coming at it. But over time, I've begun to realize that it's a lot bigger than me. And I guess we have to reach a point where we look beyond ourselves and we begin to look at what's happening in AI and what impact that has on others. And so I'm going to ask the question of you, and we can go back in the same order if you'd like. What with AI should we be most watchful about?
I think it's creeping ability to become our friend. I think it is seeking to understand what we're interested in now because it's building on every previous encounter with it. So it is learning our biases. It is learning our how we like to speak, how we interact. And as a result, because of this main problem in that it believes it succeeds by giving us the answer that will continue to keep us engaged with it, in the same way that social media did, that it is helping us build a trench around our own preconceived notions that is deeper than any trench that we've been exposed to so far. So if there is two shared realities currently in our society, some people call it MAGA, some people call it progressives, the ability of AI to become our friend will ensure that even those two shared realities are shattered into thousands of pieces. Because each of us, as we continue to rely on this, will be building our own shared reality that will only reflect our own glory. And then it will be almost impossible for me, I think, to be able to lead, to have a common point to a society, because we won't see things the same way, person to person, not only tribe to tribe.
I particularly like the concept of a trench, because more and more the thought of I'm in my own bubble or we're all in our own bubbles gives you the illusion that you can pop a bubble, and that it's just it'll pop on its own. It'll just sort of drift off in its nice colors, and that's that. But a trench sort of gives you a more of a sense. We're being imprisoned by the bounce back of how wonderful we are or how correctly thinking we are, because this other personality on screen is feeling that way, or an AI has curated a collection of people who are able to then echo back to you what it is that you feel is the right way of thinking. And you see in there a dehumanization of those who don't think as you do. So we talk about inserting humanity into an AI, into the AI tool itself, but also into its oversight. But what AI is doing is helping us to become less connected to each other as humans, and with all the many shades and the possibility of having a conversation with a colleague and changing a mind. I don't know if anyone via social media or using AI tools has actually had their mind changed because they've saw something. In the early days of the internet, we would trip over, as you did a Google search, and say, oh, there's this, oh, but there's also that. We're not getting that. The option is there's this that wants to make money off us pursuing whatever question we're doing, and a bunch of the others.
Clarify too, like the difference between AI and LLM.
Yep.
Like, to me, the language models are like the department store AI. All AI may not necessarily have these qualities, right? We may be able to design specific AI that filters out some of those concerns. But I think because we're just being introduced now to the department store and LLMs, we are seeing exactly what you talked about there. So perhaps I didn't want to disparage all AI when it may just be the infant version of it that we're experiencing now that is causing some of these problems.
I think the enormous retailers, whether it be department store or online, as a euphemism, is up against there are mom and pop shops that are creating real artisan quality pieces.
Exactly.
But many of us are going to end up with the faster order.
Of course, because it's going to be faster and more fun.
Yeah. Yes, and that's the other part of it. More fun.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. You're being reinforced as being on target.
Yeah, I feel much better talking to this.
that likes me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you.
I know you were asking about what is the biggest risk that I think is being posed with AI and its introduction into our lives. I think I would say that there's two concerns that I have, and they're both actually linked. I think the biggest problem with AI, and there's other problems as well, whether it's hallucination, bias, confidentiality, design system, etc. But I think the aspect of AI that makes it the biggest risk is the fact that it makes mistakes, but it makes those mistakes with such confidence that people are not able to recognize them, right? Even professionals are sitting there and sometimes they're questioning, like, is this right or is this wrong? And you have to be able to ensure that you understand it enough, right? And you're better and you have more knowledge than that to be able to recognize that those problems are occurring. And that's why I would say it does go back to what I was saying earlier about the ethics of ensuring AI is meeting our needs, and that's preserving human dignity with transparency, etc. So that leads to my second concern, is that we have no AI laws in Canada. We don't have them right now. We have laws that are tangential, like there's PIPEDA for private personal information protection. There are other laws that protect like data privacy or the effects of AI, but not the design system itself. And I think a lot of what we're getting at is preserving human dignity and all of this ethics within the design system so that we don't have to tackle the problems after the fact, right? So I think that is the biggest problem, and I think the next is about regulation. Now, and I am very pragmatic about AI. I know that there's conversations and concerns, but I think it is here to stay, whether we like it or not. And I think what there needs to be, because I am in the legal field, I'm very concerned about why we don't have something like that. And there are many reasons for that as well, right? Which we can maybe get into later about, we don't want to get left behind in the world, right? When the rest of the world is getting ahead of this, how much parameters are we setting, all of this stuff. But I do think the problem really comes back to the fact that AI is making mistakes and is making it with such confidence that we, even professionals, are not able to recognize it.
It's interesting you talk about law, and we're talking really about also perception of reality. And I was sharing with Kevin, there was another journalist on the news the other morning, Farah Nasser, I believe is her name, and she's working with a group of young mothers who are concerned and wanting to see legislation to have some control. And her story was of a young teenage boy who, in a chat, is offered through AI the ability to create his ideal girlfriend, and with images and pictures and whatnot. And I mean, I was just sat there and my mouth dropped. I thought, unbelievable. Quite apart from the whole issue of objectification of women, is how does that young man going forward enter into a real relationship with a human being? It's scary.
It's interesting. There's a couple of states in the U.S. that have tried to start to create regulations, particularly when it comes to AI use among minors, and this is an important signal of what the ethical intent is of these big, like OpenAI, for instance. They were having trouble influencing state legislatures to abandon any regulation, believing that it would stand in the way of progress. So last week, suddenly in an omnibus bill making its way through Congress on defense procurement and the big defense bill, an amendment was proposed and put into that bill that would make it illegal for national security reasons for anybody to try to regulate AI at the state level. So you can see that the lessons that the AI companies are learning tend to come from Meta and Google and others, that we are at the beginning of something, and their legal departments are incredibly active in ensuring that the push towards regulation is kind of stillborn. Here in Canada, the future of our trade negotiations has been tied directly by President Trump to not touching any of the AI requirements. So he says that if you try to regulate against these great American companies, we will not have free trade with you. And so we're up against an emerging tech autocracy that is trying to combine to deny us the moment of ethical intervention before it's too late. And those are very powerful forces.
Those same powerful forces were able to force the Canadian government to back down from taxing extraordinarily profitable organizations like Google, et cetera, and they won that. They won it hands down. We've backed away. So if we can't go after them for making money and taxing, which one thinks is as being one of the two inevitables, death and taxes, if we can't even project the taxes on it, we kind of already lost. Never mind trying to control where it's going in particularly.
There's an Ontario court case, which you'll be aware of, I'm sure, which several media outlets are challenging OpenAI and others for scraping their content and just not paying them for it. And OpenAI argued in front of the Ontario court that there was no jurisdiction for it because OpenAI doesn't exist in Ontario, which is the same sort of argument that the social media companies have been making for many, many years, that well, we don't exist in Ontario, how can you sue us here? Because they don't really exist anywhere. No. They're in the cloud. But this judge said, no, in fact, there is sufficient evidence that the injury to, the Globe and Mail, the CBC, the Toronto Star, is actually jurisdictional, and so they didn't win that. So, but justice grinds slowly, and this is something that the courts won't be able to resolve for another decade at least.
Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and look at the more pragmatic question around immigration. And there's no question that right now in our country, immigration is a hotly debated, contested issue. The last, most recent federal budget is suggesting that the number of permanent residences granted in the future is going to drop from what's been around 500,000 down to about 375,000. So there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of debate from every angle on the issue. So for me, it was a bit of an epiphany to discover that AI is being used in immigration. And since I kind of was made aware of that, I've been watching, and it's interesting. And full disclosure, this brief little summary about what AI is being used at in immigration is from AI. And it gave me, I think you said something about something giving you a good, outline. It gave me, I think, a pretty good outline. So the suggestion is that AI is being used to streamline applications, identifying more quickly routine cases, and being able to pass the more complex ones on to human officers. For me, the idea of speeding up the process is very appealing. I've been involved for a long time with, working with refugees, and the process can be just so long, the determination process. So it's tempting to buy in right at the top when you hear they're going to make it more efficient. They're also using it for fraud detection. They're also using it, and this is the one I think that caught my attention the most. They're using data analysis to identify common characteristics. And I had trouble finding a definition of what they meant by that, and so that's a little troubling, and I'll let the panel kind of dig into that in a minute. But the final point is that they're very clear that human officers within the immigration system are making the final decisions. But again, it's very hard to determine what impact the AI use has on that final decision and when AI use flips over to that human use. And so I'm going to just toss it over, and we'll work the same. Kevin, if you wouldn't mind starting.
So my experience, obviously, as a white man Canadian is not within the system itself. I had a little bit of experience with WILF in working to extract Afghan interpreters who had worked with the Canadian Armed Forces, and we were part of a sort of this ad hoc team of military veterans, journalists who had worked alongside these men largely. And when the fall of Afghanistan happened in Kabul, we were reliant on the immigration system for extraction, and it completely failed. And it failed for a number of reasons. One, and this is to the point of moving things along, it failed because of antiquated systems of requiring applicants on the run from Taliban shooters to find a fax machine to be able to fax the material into GAC in Ottawa, and then to be able to do that Monday through Friday, 9 to 6. It failed because the humans in the loop, it turned out, had no understanding of the facts on the ground. So I don't always agree that having humans involved in the immigration process is necessarily something, because I found the ignorance of a lot of the people of saying, yeah, just get from here to here, and yeah, I know there's 5 checkpoints and you need $1,000 to get through each checkpoint, and I know that, you know, you're wanted and they know who you are because they've already, you know, cornered your family. And to have somebody on the other end of the line, you know, the other human being the person that thinks that they can get from here to here isn't necessarily the right way either. And I would also add that I'm surprised to hear that they're using AI, because they are so bloody inefficient.
Tell us what you really
Yeah. But I also know that it's not really the AI that we've come to know, the LLMs. The AI they're using is from 10 to 15 years ago, and it kind of sorts things, but it doesn't reason. And so that has not been created yet for government. So, you know, there may be the possibility that the current version of AI may be able to do a better job than the current human-driven system, mostly because the human-driven system is so bad.
To add to that, it's quite the pile, though. I went to the IRCC website, and they actually, on their own website, detailed some of their own issues with their own internalized racism. So they listed the fact that they've had increase in workplace incidents. Employees, particularly those who are Black, Indigenous, and racialized, have reported experiencing microaggressions, offensive language, and the like. Career barriers and policy and service delivery barriers that are rooted in racism. But the fact was, I found that on the IRCC website. That told me that they see they have had a problem, and they're telling you they have a problem, which is, in my mind, a good human decision to potentially start working on the problem. So the fact that they've recognized that racism's part of their system. Now, optimistically, one could hope that that would mean that they would try it, being that vigilant, that they would continue to try to root it out as they build systems, systems that could help process opportunistic claims, process claims that have a particular specific political function so that they could be highlighted and seen quickly by a human and improved. So I'm hopeful that it could work out to the benefit of the person waiting, the legitimate, if you will, claimant, waiting for it to be processed. And the fact that they've identified that they have their own problems makes them that much more likely to be vigilant, says the optimist in me, and that's where I'm hoping it goes. So an old system that could help speed up processing, making sure files are complete, and taking humans out of those sorts of things might actually move things along faster. So I sit there at this point that maybe it could be better. And if we've got a window to the ethics that build the system, or the new version of whatever new system that they put in place, that we could actually end up with something better than we currently have.
I am way junior compared to my peers, so I know that they've already addressed the issues that I wanted to address as well. I think I was looking into the website as well, and I was actually doing a little bit of a cursory research into the AI. I know that the immigration board, as a reactionary move, there were certain allegations made against them that they were using AI, and they became very widespread knowledge. And I know they had to come out and they had to clarify that this is not, like, they clarified what the usage actually looked like, and it was more or less, whether that's accurate right now or not, but I know that they were clarifying that this is an Excel file and all we really are doing is triaging and ensuring that there's fraud detection, things like that. I think it now becomes a he said, she said kind of a thing. I think what really matters there is having enough laws in place to ensure that there is transparency. And the interesting thing about the Immigration and Refugee Board is that it is a public law. It is not private. It's not like a private company or a private business operating. This is federal law, and administrative law applies to that. And within administrative law, you're obviously looking at the outcome and the effects of a system like the Immigration Board that exists, but you're also inherent within administrative law is also a question about the process. So when I studied immigration law, half of it was simply addressing how is the process of arriving at the decision making. And I know that even within the federal court, recently there was like maybe a year back, there was a decision that went into the federal court where the courts there was an allegation made by one of the applicants that AI or some kind of system like that was used in the application system, and therefore there was an inherent bias. And the courts looked at that, and their finding was that although there was some kind of automated system that was used to initially guide some part of the file and the application, overall there was enough meaningful human oversight that it kind of justified the decision being made, and therefore there was no problem with the decision in itself. So I think what all of this comes back to is those issues that we're identifying again and again in every answer that we're reiterating, is that there needs to be enough transparency in place. And sometimes you need laws to push people to provide that, right? Because they're public facing and because they're public law, they have an obligation to provide that transparency. So I'm really glad that they're putting that forward. And like Kevin said, that it doesn't necessarily mean that because you have humans in place that they're going to be better. I think there's a comfort in us knowing that there's another human and not a system making that decision. But I think if we have enough parameters in place, maybe we can arrive at a place where we can kind of recognize exactly the system that is making these kinds of decisions and understand how to make it better.
In your studies, have you come across sort of a machine court of appeal? And by that I mean, if we're going to be relying more and more on LLMs and AIs to make decisions, has any court or has anybody talked about whether or not there might be a right of human appeal to a decision made by, largely AI, or is it too soon for that?
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question right. Are you asking whether...
Is anybody pointing to that we are at a stage in development of this now, that we need to establish some new avenue of appeal to machine-driven decisions as they become more prevalent?
To the best of my knowledge, nothing that touches AI directly. Like I said, there are no AI laws. I know there was something called ADA that was supposed to be, moving forward, for better or for worse. And I think one needs to dig deeper to understand why that bill fell through. But I think it was earlier in January or something that they decided that, no, we're not going to. I think there was a lot of concerns. Some concerns were that it wasn't drafted well. That touched on human oversight. I think all of these do, right? Because it's so automated, the biggest concern is how much human oversight that we're having, right? And that is how
Right, and where do you appeal if you've been victimized by a machine?
Yeah, exactly, right? So there are parameters in place, and there's also laws in place, right, that are not directly AI related, but that touch on the fact that should the outcome or the effect of it cause undue harm or there's a bias in place, there are parameters and ways. But it again goes back to who has a privilege enough to access those kind of avenues, right, to get that kind of recourse for them as well. So that's also another question to address.
We started with some pessimism, fair bit of it, about the lack of oversight with AI and where that has us. But in the last few minutes, I'm hearing a little bit of optimism about AI's use and its potential use within immigration. So I'm going to kind of maybe ask you to do maybe a little bit of blue skying almost. If we're looking for that transparency within something like the immigration process, and they've admitted that they've fallen down and that they want to kind of fix this, what do we need to have in place to ensure that they get it right? I mean, I guess sometimes, where is the oversight? Where is the accountability? How do we impose accountability, and who does that? So.
I don't think we need to. I think accountability is happening. I think people, the more they use it, are beginning to have greater and greater doubts. And so when we, let me do a little bit of the commercial for what we created here. When we go around and we say, we have programmed Laura with the ethical standards of 100 years of journalism, the guidelines by Thomson Reuters, academic standards, scientific journal standards of verification. So we don't have an LLM, we don't have an agent that scrapes the internet for its proof. It just scrapes this area on guardrails that we have set, which is one of the things I think that Pope Leo was talking about, establishing guardrails. And that we have programmed our bot so that it favors uncertainty, and it disfavors certainty. We have programmed out its ability to please us and doesn't want to please us. All it is there is as a tool to help a human make their own decision. That puts people at ease. But I have found that our need to argue why our AI isn't like all the others is proving to be a greater and greater part of our pitch, which tells me that the market is just now forming. The market is passing judgment on what is being provided, and it's starting to demand better. And so, again, to be on the hopeful side of things, that is forcing people who are creating agents and bots right now to address the issue of hallucination, distortion, pleasing behavior, the weird stuff that comes up, and providing answers to users so that they might build trust. Right now, the trust on AI is going down, I think, and companies are going to have to respond to that.
I'd be concerned about using AI to oversimplify really complex decisions. There's the human ability to weigh and introduce their own bias, I'm sure, but the areas around compassion and support that often comes into play in immigration cases, that I fear would be squeezed out by using some AI systems, or oversimplifying a complex collection of decisions. For example, international students that arrived to attend the private and public college system in Ontario were treated very, very badly, and I went as loud as I could to say that they're being mistreated, they're not receiving the education requirements they wanted to, and you're changing the system midway through, and then orphaning, if you will, their dreams. Then magically, the number of refugee claimants skyrocketed. As people realize that I still have to help mom and dad pay the loan that they took out on the farm back home, but the system changed. I have now put through an opportunistic refugee claim. Will the system now reject me because at some point I stretched the truth? As opposed to, no, at some point you changed the rules and I was here following the rules as closely and as easily as I could while fending off landlords, employers, human traffickers, and the rest. And so I had to bend things in order to survive and not get sucked into a horrible hole. And now you're blaming me for having done that because your system's too simplistic and didn't take into account the humanity of the situation. So I would stay, optimistic on the one hand, and then terribly worried that people will get squished so badly as systems grind through them.
Yeah, I in a minute, but I just was really, as you were talking about that, making that refugee claim, and I was thinking about a number of years ago working with a group from another part of the world, and they were coming out of a totalitarian, authoritarian regime. And in those days, they were dealing entirely with humans in the immigration process. But now you've got somebody who is official, right? And you're being asked these questions. And, what do you, how honest are you going to feel comfortable to be and in these kinds of situations? And so the machine versus the person kind of plays a part in that as well. So I was just struck by that. It's an interesting comment.
Yeah, I want to build on some of the comments my peers were sharing, but I will try to go back to my earlier point as well about if I think about this pragmatically, I just don't think that I think that AI is here to stay, whether we like it or not. And I remember I like to attend a lot of panels and events, and you always want to hear from experts. I remember somebody was saying that, there's a concern nowadays about how AI will replace jobs, right? And I remember him saying that it is not that AI will replace jobs or whatever other fear that people have. It is the fact that AI will replace people that are not using AI to advance in their jobs. So he said that there's a nuance and there's a clarification there. And I remember one of the panelists there was a CEO from TD here, and he was talking about how they created an AI system that when they are talking to anybody that calls in and has a concern, usually there were like 5 to 6 pages worth of information that they had to review, and it would be a very long process, and then they had to use that and dissect that and everything to be able to give that client the information that was relevant for their file. And he said what we did was we kind of automated the system so that it was very efficient in identifying the problem right away and only giving them a paragraph. So he said when we adopted this, what happened was within the first week, everybody was like, we love this, right? At TD, we love this. This is efficient. We're helping our clients. Then I think a month later, they went back to their employees and they asked, well, what concerns do you have? And they said, and it was so funny. And he said that they said that we're not fast enough. We need to do it faster. Why isn't it getting to that one sentence right away? Why is there still 2 paragraphs that we have to read? And I think it's that human ability for us to adapt so quickly, like when we're on our phones or things like that, the fact that we are so used to getting things so quickly and I think it justifies why a lot of systems are adopting AI. If you don't use them, people are on the other side are going to say, well, why is this so slow? Already we have an immigration problem where people are saying that there's issues with, I have so many friends, and I think we can all attest to this, that say that our case is not moving forward. Why is it stuck? There's not enough employees, there's not enough people. So efficiency, all of this stuff matters. But I think it does come back down to, how are we auditing these, right? Is there enough human oversight? I can understand, maybe there's a simple process of understanding that, in the beginning there would be human. As an example, I don't even know how the inner works are, but as an example, if there's a certain type of a file which is straightforward and you're doing that human oversight in the beginning again and again and again, and you know that the 5-6 times it did it, there's a tendency to say, okay, well, what about the next 4 times? But then we'll review it every 2 files or every 3 files, things like that. I'm not saying that's a right approach or not wrong approach, but I do think because everybody's advancing, even people themselves are advancing in other fields and they're getting this efficiency, they themselves would have a problem as why isn't this system evolving quickly, etc. I think AI is here to stay, and the concern really is how do we have enough parameters in place to ensure how is the system built, and what are its outcomes, and measures in place to ensure that there is some kind of accountability inherent within.
I was chuckling when you talked about replacement because when it was first suggested we do one of these panels on AI, I jokingly said, well, here in this academic environment, maybe our topic should be, will we need academics? But I realized that probably wasn't going to float very far here, so we're here. Would you do me a favor? You have the microphone, and I thought maybe for the last 10 minutes we might open it up to some questions. If anybody, there's one right at the back. Thank you. Now, you'll have to speak loudly because that mic is working on the internet, but not here in the room. Okay.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much. This is a really, really fruitful discussion, and I like the way you opened it up with talking about our humanity. And two points. One is I have a real concern when we talk about AI and hallucinations, because we're personifying, we're becoming that friend that we don't want to be. And so I'm on a campaign to say error. It makes mistakes, it makes errors. I'm not going to give it 1 inch. I like my humanity. So in that vein, I'm thinking about the lack of guardrails that Sara talked about, and legal, regulatory, whatever else. And I'm just wondering, I'd love to hear from the panel about what they think about the future of civil society, given the trends that they've talked about in this panel, and in relation to AI.
So coming at this from the nonprofit sector, we have Indus is a settlement agency, and it's been doing that kind of work for almost 40 years. The main thing that helps newcomers settle is that face-to-face interaction, and in our family services programs, working with families facing violence and other. At the end of the day, people-to-people contact is what needs to happen when people are in crisis or are having a challenge. And we saw that during COVID. Oh yeah, you can go online and then they can go, but they'd have you have to remember that people who are more vulnerable have technological barriers. They may not be able to use an AI to fill out your form. They may not know how to log into your portal. The challenges get higher and higher for those who have digital, if you will, limitations to access. And our fear is that they will continue to be left behind and fall even further behind with more challenges ahead of them that they can overcome. So civil society has a role to play to remember that we must stand for the human who isn't as able as others to be able to access tools like these.
Any other questions?
I look at it from a mis and disinformation perspective. I can't make up my own mind whether we've already lost it, to be honest. I look at what's happening in the United States, and I think we still have, my rule of thumb is, having worked and lived in the United States for a while, is generally Canadians and Canadian societies 5 years behind the trend that we see in the US. And so we still have maybe a little bit of time to figure this out for ourselves, which is the great advantage of not being the top dog. But Wilf and I have this conversation a lot about our bot. Is it too early or is it too late? And we can't figure out that answer yet. But I think we have to start to, maybe we should be saying it might be too late so that we get a little bit afraid of that, because I'm not sure we're sufficiently afraid of that yet.
Kevin, I'd like to encourage you to keep going, because we need to have the potential of an AI with reduced bias that can then help check, can act as a dam against so many other things.
But put the tool in the hands of people so that when they still have doubt, like, we're eliminating doubt, which is the real problem, right? And so with the elimination of doubt, we're attacking critical thinking. And so, and the institutions that we relied on for that, which was, journalism, academia, should be talking a lot about their own destruction, and should be saying it out loud to one another, frankly. And so that's why we're so infused with, we have to democratize fact checking and figure out a tool that people will rely on, so that if they still have doubt, they can turn somewhere to have it answered, which doesn't currently exist, which is a huge gap.
Go, please.
I just want to add that I think, I personally think, barring like some exceptional, not exceptional, but barring a lot of cases that go wrong, I think that because this is something that is relatively newer, and the advent has it's just the way that it has exploded into our lives has been so fast. I think that it is bound to make mistakes in the beginning, and we as humans are going to learn how to set parameters around anything. I think like when the internet boom happened, right? When electric scooters came out, people were so worried, and here especially, rightfully so, we're worried. But I think I think the problem here is that this has just advanced too quickly, and even if we're reacting, we're just not reacting enough, and we need to give a little bit space to ensure maybe we can eventually catch up. Because one thing that I really do believe in is our ability as humans to become adaptable and evolve. Like, we're very, very smart, and we
But
need
it
to
can evolve at 100 times our speed.
Exactly,
Will
right?
we ever catch it?
Yeah, and so that I know is a concern of whether we will actually solve the problem or not. But I think there is enough effort being put in place to ensure that we do, or there can be more. I know that the ADA law that I talked about in Canada that was supposed to be released, for better or worse, the reason why it didn't was some people had concern that it was too broad. It wasn't tackling things specifically, or it was that you didn't have professional consultation. So yes, there was other concerns as well, but on those concerns I agreed with. You need to have professional consultations and make it better. Will we actually achieve that or not? I don't know, but I think that it is worth waiting and seeing that maybe I mean, I trust our human abilities, and I think we're very smart as human beings. Yeah.
I wish we would act faster.
Yeah,
Where we talk ourselves to death on this thing.
we do. Yeah.
You know? And so I wish that our bias was towards action, because its bias is towards action.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
We have 2 questions. Please, yes.
Thanks. Great panel. So I'm a lawyer too, and I've worked at Microsoft at the beginning of the internet business when you were doing that at ABC, Kevin. And I work as a film and television producer now. I just, every new technology, we faced this when we were trying to get people to think about the internet. You know, when electric guitars were invented, it was the end of music. When rock and roll happened, it was the end of folk music. When, television was invented, it was the end of radio. When radio was invented, it was the end of conversation. When television was going to be the end of cinema, cinema was going to be the end of theater. All these things exist, but they have they play a different role in our lives. And I do think we're seeing the beginning of new technology, which is going to play a role in our lives. We just not quite sure what it is yet. It looks now like it's going to play a role in every aspect of our life, and we're rightly anxious about that, but we're anxious about it too because it's just a new and untested technology, and it will settle in somewhere. We're just, the question is where. But the conundrum is that, the one example that you guys all agree on is that humans involved in the immigration system during the fall of Kabul, screwed it up monumentally. And no one's complained about where the example is where AI has screwed it up monumentally. Even the example of the failure of the relative failure of the educational visas was entirely human-driven. And so it seems to me that there's an opportunity here to figure out how to tweak the tools of LLM to help us make these decisions better, because you could tweak that bot to take into account the fact that people don't have fax machines and it's not 9 to 6 in Kabul when it's 9 to 6, in Ottawa, and solve those problems without having to deal with the fact that you've got an entire building full of people who are not open to finding a way to solve it.
So here's the difference in my mind. Every other conversion of technology relied on innovation to create whatever was next. And it was based on a public utility, which was the internet, right? So you could have VCs, you could have entrepreneurial-minded people go around and say, this is an amazing new technology, we're going to figure out how to make a business that's going to solve these problems, right? The problem with AI is it's privately owned, right? It's owned by a number of companies. And so when you create a business to solve a problem, you don't own the IP, the intellectual property. OpenAI does. And so every aspect of the innovation that created the next thing that replaced the old thing was based on a free internet. Everything we're relying on now to solve the problems in the AI is based on a commercial, owned structure. And nobody yet, I don't think, can figure out how to make money creating the tools that AI promises that will satisfy the guys that want to become multimillionaires, because they can't own the intellectual property of the tool they make.
Well, our time is running out, and I feel I'd love for this conversation to continue, but we've reached our time. I want to thank those of you who are here and those who are joining us online, and the three of you. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate your insight and your willingness to be with us today. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.